Well, they are speaking. A luta continua, the struggle continues. There is a phrase very common with the Mozambican leader there. Now, another group of the population who seems to struggle every day are the youth in Africa. There are about 200 million in the continent alone. By the year 2045, the number is expected to double. Once again, in studio, we have Sarah Itambo. She is an urban farmer. Stephen Mashua, youth advocate. We also have Imali Ngusale, advocacy and EU liaison personnel at DSW. Joining me via Skype, all the way from Malaysia, is Taye Belgum from Africa Rising. Good evening, gentlemen and ladies. Welcome to the show. Now, Imali, let me begin with you. We've had that soundbite from the late Samora Machel there speaking. He talks about, a luta continua, the struggle continues. And one side or section of the population that seems to struggle every day is the African youth, from unemployment, growing corruption, limited access to, political participation. Why do you think that is the case in the continent?
For your question, Yusuf, I think one of the biggest challenges is that the young people and the youth in general are usually not perceived as adults. In some cases, referred to as adult children who are yet to mature. And it's interesting that Samora said that colonialism must die, but so does autocratism. And here's where you see country presidents who don't want to leave power because the youth who are supposedly the leaders for tomorrow are not yet ready, or even if they are ready, they still need to wait for their turn. So I'm just wondering, in the interest of the next generation, what kind of lessons are the current leaders putting in place? I think there's more that needs to be put in place other than just words, gimmicks, and speeches that are moving.
Yes.
It's no longer mediagenic, to say the least.
And so I'm sure you're referring to the ruling class here. Let me engage Taye Belgum, who is in Malaysia, is from the Africa Rising. Now, Taye, one of the dragons or problems facing youths in Africa is unemployment, and the numbers are very much high. You're going to tell us shortly how the figures look like in East Africa. Do you think governments in Africa are genuinely confronting this?
Thank you, Yusuf, for having me. I think unemployment it has to be a song. It's a song that we're going to be singing for the rest of this decade, if not more. I think most governments have assumed that the moment they created the system of education that does not allow young people to think, that does not allow young people to be able to address and tackle challenges that confronts them. Therefore, we have a lot of young people chunking out from universities and tertiary institutions and don't have jobs. And these are the same people who want to employ you and telling you they need you to have X amount of experience, years of experience before you are employed. And most of these young people also will follow this educational system that does not allow internship, that does not allow quite a number of practical lessons that gives them the opportunity to be able to acquire certain knowledge that they will not acquire in classrooms.
Yes,
and that's one of the primary reasons why quite a number of our leaders are, would do anything to retain the power, because they would retain everything not to give you the perfect education that they want, and they will send their children to other schools in abroad where they can, self-driven, they can think for themselves, they can challenge the government, they can, be who they want to be.
Well said.
Their community is starving of information and, genuine and quality education that allows them to think for themselves and also challenge the government. So
well said, Taye. Well said, Taye. Let me get Stephen Mashua, who is a youth advocate. He's with me in studio. Now, Stephen, do you agree with Taye that in some cases education is to blame because we have a lot of graduates, but they don't have the required expertise required in the market?
I believe that there has been a major skills mismatch with what the labor market needs. And this has been partly contributed by the copy-pasting of curriculums. we barely consult the private sector. We barely consult even the development sector and checking on what is happening. And I can give an example. Someone who is doing finance right now, or someone who is studying finance right now, has not been introduced to things like climate financing, which seem to have a major contribution into the world that we are living in, and in a big way affecting how the world will look like in the next 50 years. So it's a case of looking at the current industry needs and matching or building your curriculum around that.
So Stephen, are you saying, what do you think should be the solution? Do you think there should be a total overhaul of the curriculum, or do you think youth should take, relevant courses that are required by the market?
I wouldn't advocate for a total overhaul, because that's the system that we've gone through, and here we are, and we're able to push a few development agenda here and there. What should be critical is looking at what is necessary at a particular time. So that aspect of changing with time, matching the skills with the changing industry needs. So it's not a case of a total overhaul, but looking into which components really serve the needs of the current generation.
Well said. Somebody here in the studio has decided to do something that is not very common with youths. It's Sarah Itambo. She is an urban farmer. Sarah, will you advise youths, maybe those who are unemployed, to join you?
Yes. Basically, I do advise youth to look at other options besides just the white-collar jobs that they're in school for. But there are other opportunities out there which are let's say they're very basic, that we haven't yet fulfilled those roles yet. Like you'd see, we have a very big shortage of food in Kenya, even as much as we've really tried to be, in the top, let's say in the top 5 countries in Africa. But yet we're still having a very big deficit in the food production. And again, agriculture is very profitable. So basically what I do is that I train youth, and I encourage a lot of youth and mentor youth to get into agro-processing, to get into urban farming, and all the opportunities that agriculture has to offer also as an income-generating activity, not to just focus on, studies alone in a certain, area. Like people are really going towards white-collar jobs, and they're not looking at vocational training, they're not looking at even food production, And that is something that, of course, I would advise more youth to get into.
Exactly. Now, Imali, do you agree with Sarah that there is need to diversify the economy in order to give youths, some kind of an opportunity?
I partially agree with her. I wish I would say 100%, but the truth is the young people are exposed to a curriculum that makes them think that employment is the only thing. In fact, if you look at most of the graduates, you're usually trained to be an employer, which is a synonym of being a happy slave. So I guess we are all happy, the ones who are employed. But when you think a bit critically, is innovation starts from pre-unit. I think when you say that we study and then now we become innovative and then we just start business, it doesn't really work in a mindset that has been trained to serve. I think we need to now change everything from the onset. And it's praiseworthy that the Kenyan government is changing the curriculum. My question is, are the teachers enabled, and do they have the innovative skills to take the young people to the next level? So unless those questions are answered, I think what you're saying is just, it's good for the ear, but it's not really practical. A
very good question there. Now, Taya, let me get back to you once again. And there's a World Bank survey back in the year 2011 that shows that about 40% of those who join rebel movements in Africa say they are motivated by lack of jobs. Do you think if left unattended, this might pose a serious security threat to African countries?
Absolutely, Yusuf. This is a very critical situation at the moment. An idle man is a devil's workshop. The moment you're not your brain is not functional. And, scientists have said, we only use a quarter of our brain. And these are the people who are not, exposed to any sort of education. Education does not necessarily mean that you go to a building called school. Education is whatever you get information from, or wherever you get information from. And the fact that there's lack of, education, and, there are more funding of, wars within the East African region, I think there will be more deployment of, young people getting into, terrorism. Because you give an ordinary man who is very hungry, you give him a gun, then you've empowered him, But when you don't provide a school or vocational institution that allows them to express their God's given talents, and that can actually fetch them money. And that's what we are also telling the East African government and the African government. Create more vocational institutions. We need more mechanics. We need more tailors. We need more farmers. We need more all these people that can actually get our society moving, as opposed to intellectuals. Intellectuals have not helped us. So far, they just make books. They write books, and they don't even do nothing about it. They just want we to buy their books again. So we need more people who can actually critically get things done with their hands. And that's why, it's very, very necessary that we do that.
Well said, Tai. The figures look pretty bad when it comes to the continent as far as unemployment is concerned. I'm going to engage you shortly. You're going to tell me how the numbers look like in the East African region. Now, Stephen, you've already heard, I'm sure, about that report from the World Bank. And the threat is not just about, those youths who might join this terror-related organizations, the like of Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab and the rest, but I'm sure you've been following the news, and you've seen uprisings, civil disobedience in countries like Zimbabwe, Togo, Kenya in some way. Do you think it has to do with, youths who are tired of just staying home, without jobs?
I would totally agree with you on this. Mostly because when young people become disillusioned and they don't have anything to lose, chances are high that they're going to stand against their government and the people in power. So, and what I would advise in the Kenyan context, or basically in the African context, is if governments are able to invest in these young people and they're able to give them the real reason why they should be part of the patriotic lot, then chances of all these uprisings, chances of us seeing all these uprisings would be minimal. Again, we have the big issue and the big monster in the house, which is corruption. So when people who are trusted with leadership positions take all that is there, or all the future, everything that is supposed to actually make life better for all these young people, what do you expect these people to do? I mean, it's so obvious that they're not going to sit down. But then on the other hand, I would question some of the motives behind some of these uprisings, because to some extent you find like they are politically motivated in a way to satisfy the interest of a particular political candidate.
Yes, we'll come to that shortly. But what we've agreed is that one of the reasons as to why we're seeing uprising in Africa is because of unemployment, the high number of unemployment in the continent. Now, Imali, once again, reports indicate the rise of there's a rise of young social entrepreneurs, and of course, it's rising against all odds. And it continues saying, government should live up to the expectations of creating a viable, business environment for youths. Do you think that is the case?
It depends with which country you're talking about. The one I live in, we are all subjected to 30% of tax, and we don't know exactly what that money does. And just not to sound apologistic, I really do not concur 100% with also what Steven said, not because I'm intentionally antagonistic, it's because when you think about it, young people have been taught to follow the political realm at the expense of values. So unless we have values that can be passed from one generation to another, and those values that work, then we would not be seeing things like corruption.
Yes.
Because when you say that this is caused by politics only, it then what about the parents or the religious leaders? What about us ourselves? You're not taking ownership of the mistakes we've made. But having said so, I think that entrepreneurship is something that is feasible, and it's something that young people can do. They need the support, but you also need governments to buy our own goods. Governments are notorious, especially in Africa. I'm sorry to use the term notorious. I don't have any other word to describe. I think governments are notorious to get things that are manufactured in China and the US and Europe. So even if young people developed, who's going to buy them? How are you going to make sure that the policies that can support the entrepreneurs, the young entrepreneurs in Africa are actually feasible and they work? We need people who are accountable, people who believe in what they say, and not just what they say so that they can get applause, and then at the end of the day, go and take our taxpayer money and eat it and fly in big jets at our own expense.
Actually, Imali, the report I've just quoted covers the entire continent, but let's just make this practical. Sarah, you are a farmer, you are a youth. Do you get support from the government?
In a way, yes, because they recognize what I do, and by that I mean that, like earlier this year, I was nominated to go represent Kenya, Kenyan farmers, basically young Kenyan farmers in Indonesia for a farmers training. And that is support that I got from the government. I mean, I got that exposure through the government. So I would say government is doing something, it's just that it's not good enough.
Apart from the conferences and summit, do you get support from the day-to-day activity in your farm?
Yes, I do, because I work very closely with the officers, the agriculture officers in my area. So because I do, fish farming in aquaponic systems, I do poultry, I'm in livestock. I also do a little bit of vegetation also. So I work with the officers from agriculture, livestock, and also fisheries. And all that, it's not support in terms of money or anything else, but it's a lot of information that they give, a lot of mentorship that they also help me with, which has equipped me to grow myself and to grow my venture, that I am able to also mentor others. And
well said, Sarah. Speaking about conferences and summit, Taya, if you're still with me, I believe there's an upcoming East Africa Youth Summit, which is set to be held in Arusha, Tanzania. African youth, of course, have remained to be the poorest in the continent. What is the agenda this time round?
The agenda is for us to be able to enhance some of the skills, some of the lessons, some of the win successful stories that young people are doing or having within the East Africa, so that they have a space for them to learn, network, and connect with each other. And this summit is going to be the first of its kind, because we've done it previously, but this time around we're looking at 250 young youth leaders who are going to be present and connect. And we're not doing the typical conference. Tea breaks and all this, bureaucracy type of, summit. We want young people to connect and learn from each other. What's happening in your country? What's happening in your community? How can I benefit? How can you come and help us? I think, if we're not talking to each other, we can be looking for our problems in Mumbai when the answer is in Mombasa. So we are very careful, and we are trying so hard to make sure that this particular summit address that.
Fantastic. I'm sure that summit is going to come in handy. Ty, I think that will serve as your final comment. And now, final question to Sarah, Stephen, and Imali. You have 30 seconds each. And Africa, of course, has the youngest population in the world. But, there are analysts who are saying that this is some sort of a double-edged sword. It might be a dividend or a curse for the continent. Very briefly, Imali, let me begin with you. How do you foresee the future of youth in the continent?
Thank you so much, Lillian.
Imali, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. In terms of youth, I think it really depends on how much they're exposed to. I hope that the upcoming summit will help the young people advance their skills, but also challenge them to think differently. Because there's one thing that young people can do and will change everything else, and that's if we change our mind. And we change the way we think, then we'll change our environment.
Well said, Imali. Stephen, you have 30 seconds. Do you think the youthful population in Africa are going to be dividend or a curse for the continent?
I believe it's a dividend, but then that depends on the investment that each and every African country will make on this population. And then I'll say this, Africa is not short of convenings. Africa is not short of summits. So what happens after the summit, which is
what matters most.
It's what matters most.
Yes, Sarah, your final comment?
So basically for me, I'm happy because this YouLead summit is giving us a very good platform for youth leaders to come up and show what they actually want and the change that they actually want to come into play. So basically, just as Stephen says, the implementation is the one that will matter right after the summit. The platforms are usually there and they're usually many, but I'm seeing the youth going and kind of claiming what they want in the future. So I see that this vibrant youth, it kind of has an idea of what it wants and it's going for it.
Thank you, Sarah, for your input. Of course, Sarah Itambo is an urban farmer. Thank you, Stephen. Stephen Mashua is a youth advocate. Imali Ngusala is an advocacy and EU liaison personnel at DSW. And Taya Belgoon from Africa Rising is the one who